Good day. This is the fourth and the last of the collection of books that I have taken from the game, and they are still have the biography of Branzia, the Arvel Journal, the Aedra and Daedra, a Gentleman's Guide to Whiterun, and A Dance in Fire. It starts. The biography of Branzia, Volume 1 by Stern Gumbridge, the Imperial Scribe. Late in the Second Era, a girl child, Branzia, was born to the rulers of the Kingdom of Mournhold, in what is now the imperial province of Mornwind. She was reared in all the luxury and security befitting a royal dark elven child until she reached 5 years of age. At that time, His Excellency Tiber Septim I, the first Emperor of Tamriel, demanded that the decadent rulers of Morrowind yield to him and institute imperial reforms, trusting to their vaunted magic. The Dark Elves impudently refused until Tiber Septim's army was on the borders. An armistice was hastily signed by the now eager Danma, but not before. There were several battles, one of which laid waste to Mournhold, now called Al-Malixia. Little Princess Parenzia and her nurse were found among the wreckage. The Imperial General Semantius himself, a dark elf, suggested to Tiber Septim that the child might someday be valuable one, and she was therefore placed with a loyal supporter who had recently retired from the Imperial army. Sven Advenson had been granted the title of Count upon his retirement. His fiefdom, Darkmoor, was a small town in central Skyrim. Count Sven and his wife reared the princess as their own daughter, seeing it to that she was educated appropriately, and more importantly, that the imperial virtues of obedience, discretion, loyalty, and piety were distilled in the child. In short, she was made fit to take her place as a member of the new ruling class of Morrowind. The girl Branzia grew in beauty, grace, and intelligence. She was sweet-tempered, a joy to her adoptive parents and their 5 young sons, who loved her as the elder sister. Other than her appearance, she differed from young girls of her class only in that she had a strong empathy for the woods and fields, and was wont to escape her household duties to wander there at times. Branzia was happy and content until her 16th year, when a wicked orphan stable boy, whom she had befriended out of pity, told her he had overheard a conspiracy between her guardian, Count Sven, and Redguard visitor, to sell her as a concubine in Rihad, as no Nord or Briton would marry her. on account of her black skin, and no dark elf would have her because of her foreign upbringing. Whatever shall I do? The poor girl said, weeping and trembling, for she had been brought up in innocence and trust, and it never occurred to her that her friend, the stable boy, would lie to her. The wicked boy, who was called Straw fitted to him. She that said that she must run away if she valued her virtue, but that he would come with her as her protector. Sorrowfully, Paranzia agreed to this plan, and that very night she disguised herself as a boy, and the pair escaped to the nearby city of Whiterun. After a few days there, they managed to get jobs as guarded for disreputable merchant caravan. The caravan was heading east by side roads in a mendacious attempt to elude the lawful tolls charged on the imperial highways. Thus the pair eluded pursuit until they reached the city of Rifton, where they ceased their travels for a time. They felt safe in Rifton, close as it was to the Morrowind border, so that dark elves were enough of a common sight. I think there's a story about it. I mean, we'll see what's left later on, I think. Now we'll go with next one. Okay. Bring the glow to Loken. My fingers are trembling. Let's see if there's something before it. No, not after it. My fingers are trembling. The golden close is finally in my hands, and with it the powers of the ancient Nordic heroes. That fool Lucan Valerius had no idea that his favorite store decoration was actually the key to Bleak Falls Barrow. Now I just need to get to the Hall of Stories and unlock the door. The legend says there is a test that the Nords put in place to keep the unworthy away, but that when you have the golden glow, the solution is in the palm of your hands. Is it? So we will see. Aedra and Daedra. The designation of gods, demons, Aedra and Daedra, are universally confusing to the layman. They are often used interchangeably. Aedra and Daedra are not relative terms. They are elvish and exact. Azura is a Debra, both in Skyrim and Morrowind. Aedra is usually translated as ancestor, which is as close as Crodelic can come to this elven concept. Daedra means roughly not our ancestors. This distinction was crucial to the Danma, whose fundamental split in ideology is represented in the mythical genealogy. Aedra are associated with stasis. Daedra represents change. Aedra created the mortal world and are bound to the earth bones. Daedra, who cannot create, have the power to change. as part of the divine contract of creation, the Aedra can be killed. Witness Lukhan and the moons. Lokhan or Lochan maybe. The protein Daedra for whom the rule do not apply can only be banished. The Gentleman's Guide to White Run by Michael the Bard, or Michael the Bard. Welcome, good sir, to this indispensable guide. Within those pages, I, your humble author and guide, will describe to you the great city of Whiteburn, the jewel of the north. Whiterun offers numerous diversions for the man in search of adventure, fortune, and companionship, whether for a night or for a lifetime. The city is graced with not one but two worthy taverns, and there are maids and wenches aplenty. The city is located rather centrally in Skyrim, and this is well, for it is not far from anywhere. Perched high upon a rocky hill, Whiterun dominates the grassy plains that surround it. High wooden walls protect its denizens, I think, from the wolves, mammoths, bandits, and other dangers. Are the mammoths? Okay. Lurking beyond. When you first enter through the city's main gate, you will find yourself in the Plains District. This is so named because it is the lowest of the city's three neighborhoods. Ah, but there can be found the Bannered Mare, which I count among the finest taverns in all Skyrim. The scenery within is quite compelling if you have an eye for the fairest sex. A stone lass named Bolda, or Holda is it, tend the bar. Don't let that stony gnawed exterior fool you, for she is possessed by that same fiery passion that all gnawed women try too hard to conceal. Sadia, the barmaid, is an exotic, red-garbed beauty. She is quite mysterious, and you humble author is determined to learn her secrets. Outside the Bannered Mare is a modest marketplace, and here is where I found true love. Though I would never deter a fellow hunting, bound, or hound from the chase, for indeed, why should I author these tomes, if not to provide guidance? Is this very matter? I must ask that you do me this one kindness. Her name is Carlotta Valentia, and she is a magnificent beauty who makes a modest living selling bread and produce in the daylight hours. By the gods, I will make that feisty beauty mine someday. And of course, there are other services to be found in the Plains District. Balthor's General Goods offers various and sundry wares for the adventurers, travelers. Okay, and Arcadia's Cauldron offers what tonics and herbs one would expect from an apothecary shop. Something apothecary apothecary shop. Arcadia herself is an amiable sort. I often visit her to make conversation, as she is a fellow imperial far from home. She is, however, a bit old for my taste. A gentleman of advanced years might find in her a worthy companion. Should you need your blade sharpened or your armor hammered, Wormhiden offer smithing services very near the main gate. The smith is a pretty Nord named Adrienne Aviense, but she is married to a great bulking brute named Alfrith Warbear. Alberth, Alfr, Alfberth Warbear. Adrian is quite fair, but I should not want to find myself being introduced to the keen edge of that husband's war axe. If married ladies are your preferred sport, then above that, then bathe that, or have that. But don't say that I didn't warn you. You weren't warned. Dear to the smith is the drunken huntsman. Here some of the wealthiest gentlemen gather to share both a drink and rumors of the wide world. If you prefer a more distinguished class of company where you sip fine wine, you'll be well at home here. At the Wind District, I have little to say. Most of the buildings in this second tier of the city are residences, though there is also a temple of Reinareth and Jorvaskar, the mid-bow of the companions. There are some intriguing prospects to be found in the maid hall. Should you favor a strong and fearless warrior woman, you will find little game of the temple. However, the priestess Danica Pure Spring is interested almost exclusively in spiritual matters. At last, we come to the Cloud District, exclusive dominion or domain of the Jarl's or Jarl's castle. This is the Jarl, okay? I have had some merry adventures within the stone wall of Dragon's Reach. Let me tell you, the serving girls are most easily impressed by a well-spoken imperial. After all, the nights in Skyrim do grow quite cold, if you take my meaning. Yes, and I will not deny that I have visited the town's jail once or twice within which can be found in the tower level of the palace. As for the Jarl and his court, take down to avoid them. I find that they lack any sense of humor or appreciation for the imperial culture. Besides which, they are all wealthy men and so must be viewed as your most serious competition. These Nords are simple folks, after all, and too easily swayed by the sight of fine clothes and a purse full of some symptoms. Now I will conclude this work by wishing you great success in your pursuing a woman and wine. Spare a moment in your reveals to think of me, your humble author, and the risks I have taken to bring you this most thorough report on all things of interest to the discerning gentleman in the grand city of Whiterun. Ah, but I will not lie and say that it was all of a hardship. After all, who could want to sleep alone in such a cold and hard land as this, don't I? Dance in Fire, Chapter 4 by Wogan Yarth. 18 Busmeri and one Cyrodiilic farmer or former senior clerk for an imperial building commission trudged through the jungle westward from the Silo River to the ancient village of Vindice. For Decomus Scotte, the jungle was hostile, unfamiliar ground. The enormous vermiculated trees filled the bright morning with darkness, and resembled nothing so much as grasping clouds, bent and impeding the progress. Even the fronds of the low plants quivered with malevolent energy. What was worse, he was not alone in his anxiety. His fellow travelers, the natives who had survived the Khajite attacks on the villages of Grenos and Athay, wore faces of undisguised fear. There was something sentient in the jungle, and not merely the mood of the mad but benevolent ingenious spirit. In his peripheral vision, Scotty could see the shadows of the Khajiti following the refugees, leaping from tree to tree. When he turned to face them, the lithe forms vanished into the gloom as if they had never been there. But he knew he had seen them, and the Busmeri saw them too, and quickened the pace. After 18 hours, bitten raw by insects, scratched by 1,000 thorns, they emerged into a valley clearing. It was night, but a row of blazing torches greeted them, illuminating the leather-wrought tent and jumbled stones of the hamlet of Vadishi. At the end of the valley, the torches marked a sacred site, a gnarled bower of trees pressed close together to form a temple wordlessly. The Rosemary walked the torch cascade toward the trees. Scotty followed them. When they reached the solid mass of living wood, with only one gaping portal, Scotty could see a dim blue light glowing within. A low, sonorous moon from 100 voices echoed within. The Rosemary or the Rosemary maiden he had been following held out her hand, stopping him. "You do not understand, but no outsider, not even a friend, may enter," she said. "This is a holy place." Scotty nodded and watched the refugees march into the temple. Heads bowed, the voices joined with the ones within. When the last wood elf had gone inside, Scotty turned his attention back to the village. There must be food to be had somewhere. A tendril of smoke and a faint whiff of roasting venison beyond the torturable light led him. There were 5 Cyrodiils, 2 Bretons and a Nord. The group gathered around a campfire of glowing white stones, pulling steaming stripes of meat from the cavada of a great stag. At Scotty's approach, they rose up, all but the Nord, who was distracted by his bunk of animal flesh. "Good evening. Sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering if I might have a little something to eat. I'm afraid I'm rather hungry, uh, after walking all day with some refugees from Greenice and Athay." They bade him to sit down and eat, and introduced themselves. "So the war's back on, it seemed," said Scotty's amiable. "Best thing to these effete do-nothings," replied the Nord in between bites. "I've never seen such a lazy culture. Now they've got the Khajiti striking them on land, and the High Elves on at sea. If there's any province that deserves a little distress, it's damnable Valenwood." "I don't see how they're so offensive to you," laughed one of the Bretons. "They are cognital thieves, even worse than the Khajiti, because they are so blessed weak in their aggression." The Nord spat out a gab of fat which sizzled on the butt stones of the fire. "They spread their forests into territory that doesn't belong to them, slowly infiltrating their neighbors, and they baffled when the elves were shoved back at them. They're all villains of the worst order." "What are you doing here?" asked Scotty. "I'm a diplomat from the court of Yehenna," muttered the Nord, returning to his food. "What about you? What are you doing here?" asked one of the Cyrodiils. I work for Lord Arthios, building a commission in the Imperial City," said Scotty. "One of my former colleagues suggested that I come down to Valwood. He said the war was over and I could contract a great deal of business for my firm, rebuilding what was lost. The disaster after another one. I've lost all my money. I'm in the middle of rebuilding of war, and I cannot find my former colleague." "Your former colleague?" Well, another of the Cyrodiils, who had introduced himself as Regulius. He wasn't by any chance named Leos Yoros, was he?" "You know him?" "He lured me down to Valwood in nearly the exact same circumstances," smiled Regulius grimly. "I work for your employer's competitors, Lord Vanish's men, where Leodos Yaros also formerly worked. He wrote to me asking that I represented an imperial building commission and contract some post-war construction. I had just been released from my employment, and I thought that if I brought some new business, I could have my job back. Yoros and I met in the attorney that day, and he said he was going to arrange a very recreative meeting with the Sylvanar." Scotty was stunned. "Where is he now?" "I am no theologian, so I couldn't say." Regulius struggled. "He's dead. When the Khajiti attacked Athay, they began by torching the harbor where Yoros was reaching his boat, or I should say my boat, since it was purchased with the gold I brought. By the time we were even aware of what was happening, enough to flee, everything by the water was ash. The Khajiti may be animals, but they know how to arrange an attack. I think they followed us through the jungle to Vendese," said Scotty nervously. "There was definitely a group of something jumping along the tree trunks. Probably one of the monkey's folk. snorting, snorted the Nord. Nothing to be concerned about. When we first came to Vandesi and the Rosemary all entered that tree, they were furious, whispering something about unleashing an ancient terror on the enemies. The Breton shivered, remembering they've been there ever since, for over a day and a half now. If you want something to be afraid of, that's the direction to look. The other Breton, who was a representative of the Daggerfall Mages Guild, was staring off into the darkness while his fellow Provincial spoke. Maybe, but there's something in the jungle too, right on the edge of the village, looking in. More refugees, maybe? Asked Scotty, trying to keep the alarm out his voice. Not unless they're traveling through the trees now, whispered the wizard. The Nord and one of the Cyrodiils grabbed a long tub of wet leather and pulled it across the fire instantly, extinguishing it without so much as a dizzle or a sizzle. Now Scotty could see the intruders, the elliptical yellow eyes and long, cruel blades catching the torchlight. He froze with fear, praying that he too was not so visible to them. He felt something bump against his back and gasped. Regulus' voice burst from the above. Be quiet, for Mara's sake, and he climbed up here. Scotty grabbed hold of the knotted double vine that hung down from a tall tree at the edge of the dead campfire. He scrambled up as quickly as he could, holding his breath, lest any grunt of exertion escape him. At the top of the vine, high above the village, was an abandoned nest from some great bird in a trident-shaped branch. As soon as Scotty had built himself into the soft, fragrant straw, Regulus pulled up the vine. No one else was there, and when Scotty looked down, he could see no one below, no one, that is, except the Khaditi slowly moving toward the glow of the timber tree. Thank you, whispered Scotty, deeply touched that, as a competitor had helped him, he turned away from the village and saw that the tree's upper branches brushed against the mossy rock walls that surrounded the valley below. How are you at climbing? You're mad, said Regulus under his breath. We should stay here until they leave. If they burn Vendesi like they did, Athe and Grenos would be dead, sure, as if we were on the ground. Scotty began the slow, careful climb up the tree, testing each branch. Can you see what they are doing? I don't really see a tail. Regulus stared down into the gloom. They're at the front of the temple. I think they also have, it looks like, long ropes trailing off behind them off into the pass. Scotty crawled onto the strongest branch that pointed towards the wet, rocky face of the cliff. It was not a far jump at all, so close, in fact, that he could smell the moisture and feel the coolness of the stone, but it was a jump nevertheless, and in his history as a clerk, he had never before leaped from a tree 100 feet off the ground to a sheer rock. He pictured in his mind's eye the shadows that had pursued him through the jungle from the heights above, how their legs coiled to spring, how their arms snapped forward in an elegant, fluid motion to grasp. He leaped. His hands grabbed for rock, but long, thick cords of moss were, were more accessible. He held hard, but when he tried to plant his feet forward, they slipped up skyward for a few seconds. He found himself upside down before he managed to pull himself into a more conventional position. There was a narrow outcropping jutting out of the cliff where he could stand and finally exhale. Regulus! 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 Scotty did not dare to call out. In a minute there was a shaking of branches, and Lord Venice's man emerged first. His satchel, then his head, then the rest of him. Scotty started to whisper something, but Regulus shook his head violently and pointed downward. One of the Khajiti was at the base of the tree, peering at the remaining of the campfire. Regulus awkwardly tried to balance himself on the branch, but as strong as it was exceedingly difficult with one only free hand. Scotty cupped his palms and then pointed at the satchel. It seemed to pain Regulus to let it out of his grasp, but he relented and tossed it to Scotty. There was a small, almost invisible hole in the bag, and when Scotty caught it, a single gold coin dropped out. It rang as it bounced against the rock wall on the descent. A high Scott sound that seemed that like the loudest alarm Scotty had ever heard. Then many things happened very quickly. The Cathay, wrapped at the base of the tree, looked up and gave a loud wail. The other Khajiti followed in chorus as that cat below crashed down and then scraped up into the lower branches. Regulus saw in below him, climbing up with impossible dexterity, and panicked. Even before he jumped, Scotty could tell that he was going to fall. With a cry, Regulus, the clerk, plunged to the ground, breaking his neck on impact. A flash of white fire erupted from every crevice of the temple, and the moon of the Posmare prayer changed into something terrible and otherworldly. The climbing Cathay rapt stopped and stirred. Raro! It gasped. The wild hunt. Or Khergo, maybe. It was as if a crack in reality had opened wide. A flood of horrific beasts, tentacled toads, insects of armor and spine, galantuous serpents, fibrous beings with the face of gods, all poured forth from the great hollow tree. Blind with fury, they tore the Khajiti in front of the temple into pieces. All the other cats fled for the jungle, but as they did so, they began pulling on the ropes they carried. In a few seconds' time, the entire village of Verdesi was boiling with the lunatic appearances of the wild hunt. Over the babbling, barking bowling board Scotties heard the Cerridales in hiding cry out as they were devoured. The Nord too was found and eaten, and both Britons. The wizard had turned himself invisible, but the swarm did not rely on their sight. The tree the cafe wrapped was in began to sway and rock from the impossible violence beneath it. Scotty looked at the Khajiti's struck eyes and held out one of the cords of moss. The cat's face showed its pitiful gratitude as it leaped for the vine. It didn't have time to entirely replace the expression that Scotty pulled back the cord and watched it fall. The hunt consumed it to the bone before it struck the ground. Scotty's own jump uh, up to the next outcropping of rock was immeasurably worse or more successful from there. He pulled himself to the top of the cliff and was able to look down into the chaos that had been the village of Vendisi. The hunt's mass had grown and began to spill out through the passes, through the pass, out of the village or the valley. Yeah. Pursuing the fleeing Khajiti, it was then that the madness truly began. In the moon's light from Scott's vantage, he could see where the Khajiti had attacked the ropes with a thunderous boom. An avalanche of boulders poured over the pass. When the dust cleared, he saw that the valley had been sealed. The wild hunt had nowhere to turn but on itself. Scotty turned his head, unable to hear, to look at the cannibalistic orgy. The night jungle stood before him, a web of water or web of wood. He slung Reglios' satchel over his shoulder and entered. Yes.